time, I'd like to skip all the way to number five, the question number five that we have here, the resurrection in the spiritual body. And I want to ask you about this because, again, on Facebook or now on YouTube, there's a friend of mine who's Chilean. She's inviting a lot of people in interviewing. She doesn't have a theological degree. She has been sincere enough to say that she didn't even finish secondary school, but she's doing it right now. But she interviewed this Argentinian with a PhD. He's a Jew. He's from Jewish heritage, and he was talking. But he's an expert in esoteric Kabbalah and that sort of literature. And she asked him about the resurrection of the body, and then he jumped. And this is my criticism. Yes, I was telling her, you're doing the wrong thing, because he didn't say anything about Second Temple or Jewish Maccabean. He's jumped straight from first century to 13th century, and he was saying, "Oh, in the Kabbalah, we believe that the energy is the one that continues on." And I said, "Yeah, but
good for you. That sure, yeah, that's what you're going to get in the Kabbalah. But what about all this other more ancient, more contemporary to the biblical period literature?"
And that's what I said to her. I know that you haven't done any biblical. She used to be a Christian, but you are just being duped by these people who know their stuff, but they don't want to talk about first century or second century beliefs. But
you should ask her, if we were writing the story of your life, which 10 years would you like us to skip?
Yeah.
Which fifth of your life can we just ignore and get it right?
Yeah.
Obviously it's just not sound method. It's very obvious.
Yeah, and that's what I said to her. That's not, if you're going to talk about biblical stuff, you have to talk. And I said to her, you're doing the same thing that Lutherans do and the Calvinists do, that they want to, whatever is in the institutes, which is good, but if the institute doesn't say it, if the institute doesn't understand it, you reject it right away. So it's the same thing with these sort of people. But the question is, Dr. Heiser, could you explain how the concept of the divine counsel is used to explain the destiny of believers after the resurrection of the body? Because this is a very interesting thing. Might the bodies come back within Second Temple Judaism, within the time of Jesus? Did Jews and Christians believe that you come back with a proper body like what you have, you and me?
I think Paul is quite clear here, that we get a body like Jesus had in the post-resurrection, which was physical. I mean, he could eat, he could be touched, he could stand, but in other ways it transcended the physical. It didn't have blood. He could apparently pass through objects and whatnot. So it was as much as what we have, but more. It wasn't less. Okay, so Paul spends a good amount of time, dealing with this in 1 Corinthians 15, and he is tapping, into, there's Second Temple precedent for this. There's also Greco-Roman precedent for the idea. Again, this is not a unique thing, just speaking generally here, that you have spiritual beings, supernatural beings is probably a better way to put it, that you have divine or supernatural beings who are embodied when they're interacting with people, okay? That idea in and of itself is not something that Christians invented or had to invent, either in antiquity or later. People have this category, that this is not a foreign discussion to them. And connecting it to the resurrection, of course, is where, Christians are going to do and say some unique things. They're going to, say some things that reflect different kind of thinking, but the categories, again, are not foreign, to ancient people. And I think it's important because, Scripture does talk about in the eschaton, the new heaven and new earth, basically a global Eden. There's a reason why the Bible ends the way it does, with Edenic imagery, but now applied to the whole earth, where believers who again, are brothers, to Jesus. This is Hebrews chapter 2. He became, man so that, we could become like him, be made like him. We don't lose our humanity, but, it's not we get less, it's we get more. So it's the same thing with embodiment. And our destiny is to rule with him, in this place. So the language of embodiment is used, the language of place is used, the language of spatiality is used, the language of geography is used, of the final state. So if it was just a bunch of spirits floating around in like vapors or something, okay, why would you use this kind of language? Why would you use physicalized metaphors, for this? It doesn't make any sense. Unless this is actually what you're talking about. There'd be no need to talk about, again, the eternal state and our bodies and Jesus' body and the fact that, he did this for humanity and we're his brother and he's our brother and all this kind of language that will inherit the nations. None of that makes any sense if there isn't physical place and physical space in, again, what we think of as the eternal state. It would be not only unnecessary, it would be nonsensical, it would be contradictory. But that's what you have. And so I think the obvious conclusion is that it's going to be physical. We are going to have bodies like his, as Paul talks about in 1 Corinthians 15. And it'll be more of what we are, not less.
But the interesting thing is that this guy that I'm talking about, he even said, Paul believes that we're going to have a body out of energy. And I said, please don't go in there. Because you just showed up your cards that you don't know what you're talking about. I mean, he's a PhD.
Well, it's kind of, isn't it kind of interesting? I mean, not to pick on this guy, but because Christians do this in other areas. But we try to take descriptions from the Bible and come up with a physical materialistic explanation from them or for them, so that we try to use the vocabulary of science as we understand it, of the material world as we understand it currently, to talk about these things. And on one hand, that's kind of a human thing. It's kind of a human propensity to do that. But we have to realize that that's what we're doing. We're using vocabulary from one sphere of activity, one domain of knowledge, and then assuming that is going to work to explain this other thing. That's all it is. It's an assumption. These are assumptions. They're not. They don't have a necessary coherence, because this other sphere, this other domain, this new heaven and new earth, is something that we don't know is material the way we understand it. We've assumed that to try to talk about it. So on the one hand, I wouldn't beat him up for trying, to talk about it like that. But on the other hand, I would sort of beat him up and say, look, do you realize what you're doing? You're making certain assumptions here about vocabulary that you don't know, you can't know that these assumptions are correct, but you're acting as though they are.
Yeah.
So you need to sort of catch yourself there.
And this is the issue in Latin America. It's funny, Mike, that you have a guy who's 30 years old but has 5 PhDs under their belt. And I said, well, you have outlived your PhD life. And this is what people, and they don't have any proper PhDs or masters, but people are easily swayed by having, I know in English it's the same thing, but easily swayed by having some letters after somebody's name. And people think, like I said to my friend, yes, he has a PhD on Jewish mysticism, not on Second Temple Judaism, which is different. And that's the issue.
Yeah. Yeah, it's, would you go to a foot surgeon to talk to him about your heart surgery. Well, they both have medical degrees, right? No, you wouldn't do that. Okay.
Yeah.
And you wouldn't go to the heart surgeon to talk about your eye surgery. No, you wouldn't do that. I mean, fields matter. Domain knowledge can be very specific.
That's what I was saying to her, because, like I said, she hasn't done any university degrees or anything. I said, you are inviting all these people who have knowledge, but you have really. I didn't tell that to her but I was thinking, it's like you giving your kids something to eat. You have to really know what you're giving them. Same thing with inviting people and imposing them as authorities on something that they have never thought of. I remember it once. I even corrected this person on YouTube saying, "Oh, you're talking about the book of Matthew. You're wrong. This is not the way it goes." So, well, Mike, I mean, I'm running out of time because I'm the one who has to go, not you. I have to go to work. We only covered 3 questions, and I hope that there will be another time where we can get together again and cover some other questions, if you don't mind.
All right. Sure. Yeah, at some point we'll have to do that.
Yes. And any, I just like to, in the last 2 or 3 minutes, any pluggables that you might to share with us?
Well, I would encourage people to read at least Supernatural. It exists in Spanish for free. You don't have to pay for it. If you go to miqlat.org, that's miqlat.org, and in the menu, look under Resources, and you'll see Supernatural Translations. Mm-hmm. There's a Spanish translation up there. Please read that. Unseen Realm, the publisher has told me that is being translated into Spanish. I don't know when it'll come out. Mm-hmm. But those are the 2 most important books. And also there's a little book called What Does God Want? If you're a new believer or if you're just curious and seeking, you go to the same site, Miqlat, miqlat.org, Resources, and it's what does God want? WDGW. That exists in Spanish as well. So it's all free. Mm-hmm. So please, that's a little book I wrote, again, for the new believer. And I think that would be the things that I would start with. Again, if you're looking at Mike's content, what do I read? What does God want? Supernatural, and then Unseen Realm is the more academic one.
And before we came on air, I was talking to Mike about probably putting more of his stuff into Spanish. So we're looking for of making you known, Mike, through the whole Latin American continent. And let's see what waves you make. You may be going to the south to do some conferences and enjoy the weather.
Yeah, there you go. Well, it's unseasonably cold here, so I would.
Yes, well, here in Australia, it's when I get out of work. Yesterday, when I went to work, it was my windshield was frozen, so it's very cold. It's winter.
I remember the days. I remember
Yes.
Wisconsin.
Yes, same thing. Well, Mike, thank you very much. Like I said, I hope to maybe cover the 3 questions that we didn't do, and thank you for your time, and blessings to you and your family preparing to move in the near future. That you'll be you'll be a blessing where you're going.
All right, thank you.
Thank you very much. God bless.
You too. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.